Hello and welcome back to the Matrix Green Pill podcast. I'm your host, Hilmarie Hutchison, and today's guest brings a story of profound courage, vulnerability, and healing. Born in Sudan and raised in California, and now living in Egypt, Leena Magdi's life changed forever in August 2022 when her 21-year-old brother was murdered following the 2021 military coup in Sudan. In the aftermath of that unimaginable loss, Leena turned to writing as her only outlet. Her debut book, published in April 2025, is a raw and intimate memoir told through poetry, prose, and storytelling. It explores the many faces of grief, from shock and denial to guilt, anger, longing, and eventual acceptance. Today, Leena uses her voice to help others feel less alone as they navigate sudden loss, trauma, and the complicated emotional landscapes that follow. Leena, welcome and thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Hilmarie. It's so good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Let's begin with your background. What was your experience growing up between Sudan and California, and how did that shape your identity?
Well, like you said, I was born in Sudan, but I was raised in California. So we used to visit Sudan quite often, I would say every few years as a kid. My identity became a mix of California and a mix of Sudan because we would go so often and because the culture at home was still very Sudanese. We spoke Arabic with my parents at home. There was a Sudanese community in the Bay Area where I grew up. So we had that Sudanese part of us, and we would always visit our family, who we were very close to in Sudan. But there was also that undertone of not just American, but California. So we grew up with this blend. It really didn't become that obvious to me until I moved back to Sudan after graduating university. And I realized that, oh, there's so much of me that doesn't fit. Because in California, it's a very open-minded place. You know, obviously every place has its ups and downs and negatives and whatever. But generally speaking, there's a lot of tolerance there in the culture. The culture is a very tolerant type of culture. And in Sudan, your differences are kind of pointed out.
So vastly different cultures, from being raised in, as you mentioned, a culture that's so open to a culture in Sudan that was so very different. Having experienced both and then growing up in California, then going back to the Sudan, those differences are pronounced, that you really see how the lives of people, they are different, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah, the lives of people are different. The way people think is different. The priorities are different. Even the way people approach well-being, what's important in life, is very different. But at the same time, that's what you see immediately upon arrival. You see all the differences. But once you start to acclimate and you start to become more open, I always joke and I say I used to think I was a very tolerant person until I moved to Sudan and I realized how intolerant I actually am. Because I was around a lot of people whose culture was very different to me. It was very difficult for me to tolerate extreme differences in culture. If I'm around a culture whose values are very different to mine or even clash, I became a very intolerant person. And so I learned how to actually be tolerant. I didn't learn how to be tolerant in California, that is a very tolerant place. I actually learned how to be tolerant in Sudan. And then you see that there's a lot more similarities. Just as how there's so many differences, there's also shared similarities and shared values.
Very interesting. And I think that's true for anyone that's traveled a lot. As you say, initially the culture shock, seeing the differences, also, as you said, in recognizing in yourself your intolerances, but then as time goes by, as you adjust, as you acclimate to your surroundings, you actually start seeing that at the end of the day, we're all just people, and there's actually a lot of things that are similar and the same in our experience as humans, rather than focusing on what the differences are. So that's a really interesting experience from somebody who has lived in two very, very different cultures. Let's talk about your brother. I know your brother's death was a devastating turning point in your life. When did you first realize that you needed to express your grief through writing? Actually, I want to go back, even ask that question. I'm sorry about the loss of your brother. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and what you went through during that time?
So my brother was killed, and I've always written. Writing has always been my way of expressing myself, but I've never published anything, any of my writing. After things happened with Hamoudi, I was writing as a way of getting my emotions, I would say getting my thoughts out, because there was so much going on in my head and I wasn't expressing myself externally. I wasn't showing my grief. And it wasn't because I couldn't with my family. It was because I chose not to. It wasn't my family that I couldn't show my grief in front of. It was more other people who put this comparison in sibling grief versus parental grief, which is something entirely on a caliber of its own. It wasn't my family. It was just I didn't want to express my grief with my family because I didn't want to add to it. My parents were going through unimaginable loss. So I didn't want them to then have to think about having to console me. You know what I mean? I'm also the eldest sister. So there's always that feeling of responsibility towards my younger siblings. I wasn't even able to cry for a while, actually.
Let me ask you about that because you've now mentioned that you couldn't openly grieve. You were concerned about how that would further impact them during a time they were already vulnerable and going through their own grief. So, what did grief look like for you in those early days?
Do you know what's crazy? In the early days, it was acceptance. I had a surge of acceptance, and I think it really was a gift from God because there was no other way I would have been able to function mentally, emotionally, and physically if I didn't have that innate feeling of acceptance. I wouldn't have been able to talk with my mother and hold space for her grief if I didn't have that acceptance. I wouldn't have been able to go to his burial. And traditionally, women don't attend the burial in Sudan. But me and my sister went. We were the only women there. So grief for me in the early days, of course, there was shock. But more than that, because I was talking a lot, I was handling a lot of like, if anything needed to get done or needed to be written or whatever, I would do it. The only reason I was able to do that was because, and I really think was just a gift from God. I had this feeling of acceptance and it was just God given. And that over time started to like not dissipate, but it changed and it would come sporadically, the acceptance, but then other feelings started to come in its place. But in the beginning, it was just acceptance and shock. And I was just moving. I wasn't thinking. I was just moving, moving, moving. Like when we first got the call, it was just me and my mom. I didn't even wait for my mom. I just left. I left to the hospital and I didn't even know what hospital my dad was in until me and my cousin were driving and I called him to ask him where he was. I was just moving. I wasn't thinking.
That's interesting. It's almost as if our bodies and our minds protect us by just going through the motions, doing things that need to get done to keep you moving forward, as you say, without actually dealing with it. People often talk about the stages of grief, but of course, it's not linear and not everyone goes through the same path and it's not the same feeling for everybody. And as you said, even for yourself, there was different feelings, different emotions at different times. I know in your book you explore the different phases of grief. How do you personally define grief and how has your understanding of it evolved?
I don't think I had a real understanding of grief before my brother passed at all. After he passed, I think every day my understanding of grief gets more and more intimate. And I would say that grief, it's like everybody that you love holds a special place in your heart and they bring out a piece of you or a part of you. When somebody that you love passes, in their place is that grief. For example, if I see a joke or if I see something on Instagram, for example, that I would have shared with my brother, there's like a split second where I laugh and I think about him because I'm thinking of sharing it with him. And there are some things that I used to only share with him because it's our humor together. And then that grief settles in because it's him. It's that. So I don't know how I would explain it, except to me, I look at it kind of like a person. And just as people are multifaceted and complicated, and we are not just one thing, we have so many things within us. That's how I see grief. But I see it as like a person that you become eternally linked to when someone that is very close to you dies. I don't think the grief itself is a negative thing. I think it's something that should be welcomed as a part of your life.
There's no doubt it changes one. Do you find that sometimes you see people, a man, and you think it's him? Do you ever get that feeling or that experience?
Yeah, I do. I live with my parents and my sister and her family. My brother-in-law, sometimes he comes down the stairs and he's wearing these basketball shorts. It's happened a couple of times. And Hamoudi always used to wear basketball shorts. And sometimes when I'm sitting in the living room table and I just see his legs just coming down the stairs, it's less than a split second, but just for that small, I don't even know if I would call it a period of time, but just for that like nanosecond, I think it's Hamoudi.
Yeah, I have that. My sister passed at a young age as well. I would see people and I would just get a flash, it's her. I realized it can't be. It's just like you say, it's like that nanosecond of just, oh, and then realizing, no, but it can't be. It's not real. Your memoir blends poetry, prose, and narrative. How did writing become a form of catharsis for you?
I think it always has been. It didn't become that way. I think it just always has been because I've never been good at expressing myself vocally. I've always been shy about just saying how I feel in general out loud. And when something deeply hurts me, I actually can't talk about it out loud. I can't. The only person really that I can really speak to like that when I am in my hurt is my sister. But other than that, when I'm deeply hurt by something, I can't talk about it. If I'm very angry, I can't speak. I have to calm down so that I can actually organize my thoughts and be able to talk. But a lot of the times, I don't even know what I'm writing until after I've finished writing it. It happens, I'm not consciously writing. I'm not intentionally writing. I'm not saying I'm going to write about this. I just write is literally a catharsis. It's a release. I think it's always been that way. Maybe because of my vocal incompetence.
Well, I think that is amazing because I think for you to have that ability, to have a healthy way of getting those feelings, those emotions out through by expressing it on paper is very good because many people don't have the ability to vocalize it and then they don't even have the ability to write it down. So then they act it out or it comes out, it's got to come out of your body somehow. And then there's other ways that people, that's not necessarily so healthy. So to have that ability to write, I think is fantastic that you've been able to do that. But you've taken it a step further. You didn't just write it down. In time, you realized that other people could benefit from the experience that you have gone through. What is it that led you to say, I'm going to write a book, I'm going to publish this for the world to see?
That was after we came to Egypt. After the war in Sudan, we fled here to Egypt, to Cairo. I remember my mind felt very, very dense, and I felt like I needed to get it out. And as I started writing, I realized I was writing more and more about grief rather than about one specific experience, but I was writing about grief in general. It was helping me a lot. Like I remember in the beginning when I first started writing, I couldn't meditate. Anytime I would close my eyes, my body would physically shake. I wasn't able to emotionally process anything because I was overwhelmed. And then once I started to write and my mind became clear, once the book was done, like the initial drafts were done, I was able to emotionally release. In the beginning process, that I realized that if this is helping me so much and grief is so universal, it's got to relate to other people. It has to. This is something that's so heavy. And there's so many different types of grief that aren't talked about, and people feel bad about their grief, like sibling grief. It's like if I talk about my grief, then I'm trying to take away from my parents' grief. And that's not the case. But that's what society or culture makes you feel like. No, don't show your grief. Don't do this because you're going to add more burden. It's not as important. Whatever, people say a lot of different things. So people end up grieving on their own or feeling isolated in their grief or sometimes feeling guilty. Or some people end up feeling resentful. There are some people who lose their parents at a young age, and a lot of people in the community or in the family focus on the spouse that's living. Maybe the woman has lost her husband or the husband has lost his wife, and all of the attention goes there, but none of the attention is on the children who have lost their mother or their father. There's like a hierarchy. I don't know if that's the word, but when it comes to grief, you kind of get lost in the sidelines, and you're not really seen. I figured if I was to write a book or if I was to write about my grief and share it, then some people could feel less alone and seen and feel like it's okay to talk about, their grief, and it's okay to talk about it. There are spaces to talk about it.
I love that you did that. I love that you were so vulnerable to be willing to share this, realizing that others could possibly benefit from what you've gone through, as you say, so that they could feel seen, that they're not so lonely in the journey. Congratulations, of course, on publishing the book. That is an amazing accomplishment. You also mentioned that during the process, there's resentment, loneliness, guilt. Of course, you mentioned writing was a way that you dealt with it. But did you have any other coping mechanisms that helped you survive through the most overwhelming moments?
I prayed a lot. And by praying, I mean like I talked to God. I would talk to God like I would talk to a friend. And I talked to Hamoudi. I believe that he hears me. And I talked to my sister, both of my sisters. I talked to both my sisters. And I tried to do things that I know Hamoudi would like. For example, Hamoudi used to be very, very, very generous. Two things. One, he was really sweet. Like he had such a sweet character. He always saw the best in people. I used to tell him he was naive. And I used to be like, Hamoudi, like, this person is not like this. And he always saw the best in people. I've tried to adopt that habit of seeing the best in people. He was also very generous. He always gave extra tips constantly. And in Sudan, there were always like people on the street asking for money. He just always gave a lot of money. It's like if you gave one person in Sudan, like all of a sudden it was like a huddle of people around your car. And it was discouraging because it's like you don't want all those people around your car. But he didn't care. He would always give. He just gave so much. So I've adopted that habit as well. And every time I give an extra tip or whatever, I do it for him. There's things like that. I start off the book by saying, I'm with you always. You're with me always. And that's what I mean. I mean that he's with me always, like in everything that I do. I'm including him. Like I'm thinking about him and I'm trying to integrate his part of his personality and his habits into what I do and how I do it so that he is with me in all that I do.
I love that. And I love how you talk about him. What a generous and sweet person he was. What was the age difference between the two of you?
10 years.
10 years. So your little brother.
Yeah.
Such an awful thing to go through. But I love that you're keeping him that close to your heart. And like you say, in everything that you do, you're seeing you doing things sort of in honor of the way he would be. Many people struggle with the question, does it ever get easier? Based on your journey, how would you answer that question?
I don't think it can get easier. I don't think it's supposed to get easier, but I think if you're open to it, and I talk about this in my book, this concept of being broken open, where grief does that, it breaks you open. And in that process of being broken open, your capacity to receive love and your capacity to grow and your capacity to evolve and mature, just so much, it increases and it expands because we're flexible, we're not set. And grief does that because we don't talk about it, because it's such a taboo topic. It is so hurtful and it's so painful. We resist it and we suppress it. But when we welcome it and we welcome that process of being broken open, then you realize how to change with grief, because your life is going to be altered whether you like it or not. You're either going to be resisting the flow or you can move with the flow, but it's staying. Grief is staying. It's there. And if you resist it, it's just going to make it harder. But if you open up to it, you become a different version of yourself, and the pain of it doesn't go away and it doesn't get easier. And why should it? You lost a person in your life that is so important to you. That is, how could it get easier? It can't get easier, but you just learn different ways to keep going in life and to keep them with you.
This is why you're such a good writer, because you're able to take these thoughts and express them. I love how you say it breaks you open and then it increases your capacity to receive love and to grow. That explains it really well. I mean, I lost my sister 24 years ago, and just in talking to you, it makes me sad. I can feel that sadness just thinking about her. So, yes, for me in time, of course, you don't think as much about it, but it has been a long time. But still, that grief, that sadness is still there. You never get rid of that. Yeah, that never goes away, unfortunately. What do you hope readers, especially those dealing with sudden or traumatic loss, will take away from your book?
One, that they have within themselves the ability and the strengths to, I don't want to use the word overcome. Like, I don't want to use that word. but to grow with whatever tragedy they've been faced. They've already been equipped. I talk about character strengths in my book, and that's a concept in positive psychology that basically says that we all have these strengths within us. These strengths help you. So when you invest in yourself and your own well-being and your self-awareness and all of that, you can start to see how you have these strengths in you that help carry you forward so that you don't fall into helplessness and hopelessness. That's one. And two is that you are not alone, and grief isn't something to be scared of. It's something to open up to and to be able and to talk about. There are spaces to talk about it. It's not something to resist. If it has come to you, don't resist the feeling. Open yourself to the whole feeling and then see how you can grow through that. As painful as that thought and that concept is, to grow through your grief, but you can.
I love that. And I'm so happy that you wrote the book. I'm so sure that many people will benefit from you sharing your journey and the strategies that you've used. So, again, thank you for that. Now we have come to the segment of our show where I will ask you some rapid fire questions, our version of a game show. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Poetry or prose? What feels more natural to you?
Prose.
A place where you feel closest to your brother?
The car.
A book that helped you through grief?
It's this book called The Empty Room. It's about this sister who lost her brother in like the 80s or something like that. He had this really horrible disease and they had to keep him in a bubble. And one of my colleagues actually sent it to me. She FedExed to Sudan.
Wow. What does healing mean to you?
Healing means accepting everything that's going on, like all the negatives that's going on in your life and yourself, recognizing the dark thoughts that you're having and not putting them down, but trying to understand them and see where they're coming from and using that so that you can grow from them. That's healing.
What is one thing that you do every day, no matter how busy you get?
I pray.
Well, thank you for playing along. That was easy enough. Now I would like to ask you our signature green pill question. What was your green pill moment, the action or event that was the turning point for you or your career?
I would say deciding to get my master's in positive psychology because it seemed not impossible, but very difficult to do at the time because I was living in Sudan and the master's program was in Philadelphia and it wasn't online. And I was just very persistent to do it anyway and to go to apply. And everyone was telling me, don't even apply because there's no point. Even if you were to get in, you can't fly to Philadelphia twice a month. That was the setup for the program. And I felt like I belonged there. And I had this feeling of this is for me and this is the trajectory that I'm supposed to be on in my life. This is my path. So I was like, no, I'm going to do it. God's going to make it happen. I'm just going to do it. So while I was doing my personal statement, I remember it was February of 21 and we were in Boston because we had traveled with Hamoudi. It was his first semester on campus at MIT. And I got an email saying that the next year would be the first year that the program goes fully online. And when I got that email, I hadn't finished my personal statement, but it was kind of like confirmation. I was like, oh, I'm going to get in.
You knew you were destined to do it. That was the program you needed to do. And even when it wasn't online, it became online exactly at the time that you needed it to be online. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And that set you on the course that you went afterwards.
Yes, that's the course I'm on now. And when you feel like what you're doing aligns exactly with who you are, and I love it.
Fantastic. Leena, thank you so much for sharing your story with such honesty and vulnerability and depth. Your journey reminds us that grief does have many faces, and none of them are wrong. Through your writing, you're offering comfort, connection, and a reminder that none of us have to walk through loss alone. So thank you so much for putting your thoughts and your journey out into the world for others to benefit from.
Thank you, Hilmarie. It was so good for me to talk with you today.
Before we wrap up, where can our listeners find your book or connect with you?
They can find the book on the dreamworkcollective.com. And if you are outside of the UAE, you can find it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, Indigo if you're in Canada, Waterstone if you're in UK. And you can connect with me on Instagram at Leena Magdi X. So that's XLEENA MAGDIX.
Thank you very much. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us for another episode of the Matrix Green Pill podcast. If today's conversation touched you, as it did me, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. It helps us reach more people who need these stories. Until next time, hold space for your emotions and take healing one moment at a time.
If you enjoy our conversations, please like and subscribe. See you next Wednesday.